The autumn wind swept through the streets of Chicago, carrying with it the first hints of the approaching winter. Leaves danced across the sidewalk in swirling patterns of orange and gold, while the morning sun struggled to break through the heavy grey clouds that hung low over the city. On this particular Monday morning, a small figure made her way down Maple Street, her worn backpack bouncing against her thin shoulders with each step. Emma Carter was 10 years old, though she looked younger due to her slight frame. Her brown hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, secured with a faded rubber band she had found in the school hallway weeks ago. Her clothes were clean but clearly second-hand. A blue sweater with a small hole near the left cuff and jeans that were just a bit too short at the ankles. Despite her modest appearance, there was something remarkable in her eyes, a quiet intelligence that seemed to take in everything around her with careful observation. She paused at the corner of Maple and Fifth, waiting for the crosswalk signal to change. A woman in an expensive coat rushed past her, nearly knocking her off balance without so much as a glance in her direction. Emma steadied herself and said nothing. She had grown accustomed to being invisible. It had been 18 months since the accident that had taken her parents. 18 months since she had moved into the Greenwood Group home on the east side of the city, a squat brick building that housed 12 children who, like her, had nowhere else to go. The memories of that night still came to her in fragments. The screech of tires, the shattering of glass, the voices of strangers telling her everything would be okay, when clearly nothing would ever be okay again. The signal changed, and Emma crossed the street, her steps quickening as Jefferson Elementary School came into view. The building was old, its red brick facade weathered by decades of Chicago winters. A large banner hung over the main entrance announcing the upcoming fall festival, though one corner had come loose and flapped lazily in the wind. Emma walked through the front doors and immediately felt the familiar tightness in her chest. School had once been her favorite place, a sanctuary where her love of learning was celebrated and encouraged. That had changed 3 months ago when Mrs. Patricia Hendricks had become her 5th-grade teacher. She made her way down the crowded hallway, weaving between groups of chattering students. Some of them glanced at her as she passed, their eyes sliding over her worn clothes before looking away. A few whispered behind their hands, though Emma pretended not to notice. The classroom door was open when she arrived. Most of her classmates were already in their seats, talking and laughing as they waited for the morning bell. Emma slipped inside and made her way to her desk in the back corner, setting her backpack carefully on the floor beside her. Mrs. Hendricks stood at the front of the room, her back to the class, as she wrote something on the whiteboard. She was a tall woman in her late 40s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp features that seemed permanently set in an expression of disapproval. She wore a crisp navy dress and sensible heels that clicked against the linoleum floor whenever she walked. Emma pulled out her notebook and pencil, arranging them neatly on her desk. She had completed all of her homework over the weekend, checking and double-checking each answer to ensure there were no mistakes. It was important to her that her work be perfect, though she had learned that perfection did not guarantee praise, at least not from Mrs. Hendricks. The morning bell rang, and the chatter in the classroom gradually died down as students settled into their seats. Mrs. Hendricks turned from the whiteboard and surveyed the room with her cold grey eyes, her gaze lingering on each student before moving to the next. "Good morning, class," she said, her voice carrying the clipped precision of someone who expected immediate compliance. "I trust you all completed your reading assignments over the weekend. We will begin with a discussion of the chapter before moving on to today's lesson." A few students groaned quietly, but most simply nodded and reached for their books. Emma already had hers open to the correct page, her notes from the weekend reading neatly arranged in the margins. "Let us start with a simple question," Mrs. Hendricks continued, clasping her hands in front of her. "Who can tell me the main conflict in Chapter 7? Several hands went up around the room. Emma raised hers as well, though she kept it lower than the others, almost hoping not to be noticed. She knew the answer, of course. She always knew the answers. But Mrs. Hendricks rarely called on her, and when she did, it was usually to find fault with whatever Emma said. Mrs. Hendricks scanned the raised hands, her eyes passing over Emma without acknowledgement. "Madison," she said, pointing to a blonde girl in the front row. "Go ahead." Madison Thompson was everything Emma was not. Her father was a successful lawyer, and her mother sat on the school board. She wore designer clothes and carried a backpack that probably cost more than everything Emma owned. She was also Mrs. Hendricks's favorite student, a fact that was obvious to everyone in the class. "The main conflict is between the protagonist and his brother," Madison said confidently. "They both want to inherit their father's business, and it's causing tension in the family." Mrs. Hendricks smiled, a rare occurrence that transformed her stern features into something almost pleasant. "Excellent, Madison. That is exactly right. You clearly did the reading carefully." Emma lowered her hand, trying to ignore the familiar sting of being overlooked. It was not that Madison's answer was wrong, it was simply incomplete. The chapter had explored a much deeper conflict, one that went beyond the surface-level family dispute. But Emma had learned that speaking up without being called upon only invited criticism. The discussion continued for another 15 minutes, with Mrs. Hendricks calling on various students while consistently ignoring Emma's raised hand. Finally, the teacher moved on to the day's lesson, a review of long division that most of the class had been struggling with. Emma copied the problems from the board into her notebook, working through each one methodically. Math had always come easily to her, a fact that had delighted her parents when they were alive. Her father had been an accountant, and he used to joke that Emma had inherited his gift for numbers, along with her mother's stubborn determination. She finished the practice problems before anyone else and sat quietly, waiting for further instructions. Around her, other students were still working, their pencils scratching against paper as they struggled with the calculations. Mrs. Hendricks walked slowly between the rows of desks, pausing occasionally to offer guidance or correction. When she reached Emma's desk, she stopped and looked down at the completed work with a frown. "You're finished already." "Yes, Mrs. Hendricks," Emma replied softly. "I checked my answers twice." The teacher picked up Emma's notebook and examined it closely, her eyes narrowing as she searched for errors. After a long moment, she set it back down without comment and moved on to the next student, leaving Emma to wonder if she had done something wrong. The morning passed slowly, each minute stretching into what felt like hours. When the lunch bell finally rang, Emma gathered her things and made her way to the cafeteria, her stomach growling in anticipation. Breakfast at the group home had been a small bowl of oatmeal, and she was eager for the free lunch that the school provided. The cafeteria was a large, echoing space filled with long tables and the cacophony of hundreds of conversations happening simultaneously. Emma collected her tray, a slice of pizza, a carton of milk, and an apple, and looked around for an empty seat. Most of the tables were already full, clusters of friends, saving spots for each other with backpacks and lunchboxes. She spotted an empty seat at the end of one table and made her way toward it. But before she could sit down, a boy from her class, Tyler Morrison, slid into the spot and grinned up at her mockingly. "Sorry, this seat's taken," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "Try the floor. That's more your speed." A few other students nearby laughed, and Emma felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She turned away without responding and continued searching until she found a spot at an otherwise empty table near the back of the cafeteria. She sat down and ate her lunch in silence, trying to focus on the food rather than the isolation that pressed in around her. After lunch, the class returned to their room for the afternoon session. Mrs. Hendricks announced that they would be working on a creative writing assignment, a short story based on a personal experience that had taught them an important lesson. "You will have the rest of the period to begin your stories," she explained, handing out sheets of lined paper. "I expect thoughtful work that demonstrates proper grammar and sentence structure. This will count for a significant portion of your grade this quarter." Emma took her paper and stared at it for a moment, considering what to write. She had so many experiences she could draw from, though most of them were painful. After a moment's hesitation, she began to write about a day she had spent with her father at the park, learning to ride a bicycle. It was a happy memory, one that she held close to her heart even now. Her pencil moved steadily across the paper as the words flowed from somewhere deep inside her. She wrote about the fear she had felt when her father first let go of the bicycle seat, the wobbling uncertainty as she struggled to find her balance. She wrote about how she had fallen, scraping her knee on the concrete path, and how her father had scooped her up in his strong arms and told her that falling was just part of learning. "The most important thing," he had said, "is that you get back up and try again. That's how you know you're brave." Emma was so absorbed in her writing that she did not notice Mrs. Hendricks approaching until the teacher's shadow fell across her desk. She looked up, startled, and found the older woman staring down at her with an expression of irritation. "Miss Carter," Mrs. Hendricks said sharply, "what do you think you're doing?" Emma blinked in confusion. "I'm working on the assignment," she replied, "the personal experience story." Mrs. Hendricks snatched the paper from Emma's desk and scanned it quickly, her frown deepening with each line she read. "This is completely inappropriate," she declared loudly, drawing the attention of the entire class. "I asked for a story about a lesson you learned, not some maudlin tale designed to garner sympathy." Emma felt her face burn as her classmates turned to stare. "But the story is about a lesson," she protested quietly. "My father taught me that falling down doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're trying." Mrs. Hendricks crumpled the paper in her fist and dropped it on Emma's desk. "I will not have you disrupting my class with this attention-seeking behavior," she snapped. "You will write a new story on an appropriate topic, and you will stay after class to discuss your attitude." Emma wanted to argue, to explain that she had not been seeking attention, that the memory of her father was one of the few things she had left. But the words caught in her throat, trapped behind the lump of emotion that threatened to choke her. She simply nodded and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to think of something else to write. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of suppressed tears and forced concentration. Emma wrote a bland story about learning to share toys with a friend, the kind of safe, emotionless piece that she knew Mrs. Hendricks would accept. She handed it in at the end of class and gathered her things, dreading the conversation that was to come. Once the other students had filed out, Mrs. Hendricks closed the classroom door and turned to face Emma with her arms crossed over her chest. "Do you know why I asked you to stay?" she demanded. Emma shook her head, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. "Because your behavior today was unacceptable," Mrs. Hendricks continued. "You finished your math work before everyone else, trying to show off. You wrote that manipulative story to make people feel sorry for you. I have seen children like you before, Miss Carter. Children who think that being an orphan entitles them to special treatment." The word hit Emma like a physical blow. She looked up, her eyes wide with hurt and disbelief. "I wasn't trying to show off," she whispered. "I just finished my work, and my story was real. My dad really did teach me to ride a bike. He really did say those things." Mrs. Hendricks waved her hand dismissively. "I don't want to hear excuses. From now on, you will wait until other students are finished before turning in your work, and you will choose topics for your writing assignments that do not involve your unfortunate circumstances. Is that understood?" Emma swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that burned behind her eyes. "Yes, Mrs. Hendricks," she managed. "Good, now go. I'm sure your group home has rules about when you need to be back." Emma grabbed her backpack and hurried from the room, not stopping until she was outside the school and around the corner, out of sight of anyone who might see her crying. She leaned against the rough brick wall of a nearby building and let the tears fall, her thin shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She missed her parents so much. She missed her mother's gentle voice and her father's warm hugs. She missed the small house they had lived in, with the yellow door, and the garden her mother had tended so carefully. She missed feeling like she belonged somewhere, like she mattered to someone. After several minutes, Emma wiped her face with her sleeve and took a deep breath. She could not change what had happened, could not bring her parents back or make Mrs. Hendricks treat her fairly. All she could do was keep going, keep trying, keep getting back up when life knocked her down. Just like her father had taught her. She adjusted her backpack and started walking toward the group home, her steps slow and heavy. The afternoon had turned cold, and she wished she had a warmer jacket, but the one she owned would have to do until winter, when the group home would distribute donated coats to all the children. The Greenwood group home came into view after a 20-minute walk. It was a 3-story brick building that had once been a small apartment complex before being converted to its current use. The windows were covered with metal bars, a safety feature that always made Emma feel more like a prisoner than a resident. A chain-link fence surrounded the small yard, which held a rusty swing set and a basketball hoop with a torn net. Emma pushed open the front door and stepped into the dim entryway. The smell of institutional cleaning products mixed with the lingering aroma of whatever had been served for lunch, something with cabbage, from the smell of it. She signed in at the front desk, where a bored-looking staff member barely glanced up from her phone, and made her way upstairs to the room she shared with 3 other girls. The room was small, barely large enough for the 2 bunk beds that had been crammed inside. Emma's bed was the top bunk on the right side, the only spot that offered any semblance of privacy. She climbed up and pulled her thin blanket over her shoulders, staring at the water-stained ceiling and wishing she were anywhere else. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her tense, but they passed by without stopping. A moment later, she heard voices from the room next door, 2 boys arguing over something trivial. Life at the group home was a constant negotiation of space and peace, a delicate balance that could be upset by the smallest provocation. Emma pulled out her notebook and began working on her homework, determined to stay on top of her studies despite everything. Education was the one thing that no one could take away from her, the one path that might lead to a better future. Her parents had always emphasized the importance of learning, and she clung to that belief like a lifeline. Hours passed as Emma worked through math problems, read her assigned chapters, and completed a worksheet on the American Revolution. By the time dinner was called, her homework was finished, and her eyes were heavy with fatigue. Dinner at the group home was a communal affair, all 12 children seated around 2 large tables in the basement dining room. The food was basic but adequate, spaghetti with meat sauce tonight, served with garlic bread and canned green beans. Emma ate quietly, answering questions when spoken to, but otherwise keeping to herself. After dinner, there was an hour of free time before lights out. Some of the children watched television in the common room, while others played board games or read. Emma chose to return to her room, where she could have a few moments of solitude before her roommates arrived. She lay on her bunk and thought about her uncle, her father's younger brother, whom she had not seen since her parents' funeral. Michael Carter had been a distant figure in her life, even before the accident. Someone who sent birthday cards with money inside but rarely visited in person. She remembered him as a tall man with kind eyes, his face so similar to her father's that it had been painful to look at him. After the funeral, there had been some discussion about Emma going to live with him, but something had happened, she never learned what, and instead she had been placed in foster care and eventually transferred to the group home. She had asked about him once, in the early days, but the social worker had simply said that he was not in a position to take her in at this time. Emma wondered where he was now, what he was doing. Did he ever think about her? Did he know what her life had become? She doubted it. If he cared, surely he would have done something by now. The days that followed fell into a familiar pattern of school, homework, and the endless routine of group home life. Mrs. Hendricks continued to single Emma out for criticism, finding fault with everything from her handwriting to the way she sat in her chair. Other students began to notice, some with sympathy and others with barely concealed amusement. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the creative writing incident, something happened that would change everything. Mrs. Hendricks had assigned a group project on the solar system, and Emma had been placed in a group with Madison Thompson and 2 other students who clearly did not want her there. They divided up the work, assigning Emma the task of creating a visual display while they handled the research and presentation. Emma threw herself into the project, spending her free time at the group home, carefully drawing and coloring the planets, creating a beautiful poster that showcased each world's unique characteristics. She used her limited supplies creatively, mixing colors and adding details that brought the solar system to life. On the day of the presentation, Emma brought her poster to school, carefully wrapped in a plastic bag to protect it from the morning drizzle. She was proud of her work and hopeful that, for once, Mrs. Hendricks would have nothing to criticize. The presentations began after lunch. One by one, groups stood at the front of the room and shared their projects. Some were good, others mediocre, but Mrs. Hendricks offered words of encouragement to each team, pointing out strengths and gently suggesting improvements. Then it was Emma's group's turn. Madison walked confidently to the front of the room, followed by the other team members. Emma brought up the rear, carefully unrolling her poster and setting it on the easel that had been provided. She stepped back and waited for the presentation to begin. Madison spoke first, explaining the basic structure of the solar system in a clear, practiced voice. The other team members added information about individual planets, their moons, and their positions relative to the sun. Emma listened quietly, waiting for her moment to explain the visual display she had created. But when Madison finished speaking, she turned to Mrs. Hendricks with a smile. "That concludes our presentation," she said. "Do you have any questions?" Mrs. Hendricks nodded approvingly. "Excellent work, team." The research was thorough, and the presentation was well organized. She paused, her eyes drifting to the poster on the easel. "Although I must say, the visual display leaves something to be desired." Emma's heart sank. She looked at her poster, at the carefully drawn planets and the painstakingly colored details, and felt her pride crumble into dust. Madison glanced at Emma with a barely concealed smirk. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hendricks. We tried to supervise the visual work, but some team members are harder to manage than others." "I see," Mrs. Hendricks said, her gaze settling on Emma with familiar disapproval. "Miss Carter, perhaps next time you could put more effort into your contributions. This poster looks like something a first grader might produce." A few students laughed nervously, and Emma felt her face flush with humiliation. She wanted to defend her work, to point out the hours she had spent on it and the limited supplies she had to work with, but she knew it would do no good. Mrs. Hendricks had already made up her mind. The presentation ended, and the class moved on to the next group. Emma returned to her seat and stared at her desk, fighting back tears. She could feel the other students glancing at her, some with pity, others with the casual cruelty of children who had found an easy target. When the final bell rang, Emma gathered her things and headed for the door, eager to escape the classroom and the weight of her humiliation. But before she could reach the hallway, Mrs. Hendricks' voice stopped her. "Miss Carter, stay behind. I need to speak with you." Emma's stomach twisted with dread. She turned and walked slowly back to the teacher's desk, keeping her eyes lowered. "Yes, Mrs. Hendricks." The teacher waited until the last student had left before speaking. "Your performance today was disappointing," she said coldly. "I expected better from you." "I worked really hard on that poster," Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand what was wrong with it." Mrs. Hendricks leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What was wrong is that you clearly do not take your education seriously. You coast along on whatever natural ability you might have without putting in the effort that real success requires." "That's not true," Emma protested, a spark of defiance flickering to life inside her. "I do my homework every night. I study for every test. I try my hardest in everything I do." Then clearly your hardest is not good enough, Mrs. Hendricks snapped. Perhaps that is why you ended up where you are. Some people are simply not meant to succeed. The words hit Emma like a slap across the face. She stared at the teacher, her mind struggling to process the casual cruelty of the statement. "Are you saying I deserved what happened to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That my parents died because I'm not good enough?" Mrs. Hendricks' expression flickered, perhaps a moment of recognition that she had gone too far, but it was quickly replaced by her usual coldness. "I am saying that you need to take responsibility for your own life instead of expecting others to feel sorry for you. Now go. I have papers to grade." Emma fled the classroom, her vision blurred with tears. She ran down the hallway and out the front door of the school, not stopping until she reached the small park 2 blocks away. She collapsed onto a bench beneath an old oak tree and sobbed, great heaving cries that shook her entire body. How could anyone be so cruel? How could a teacher, someone who was supposed to help and guide children, say such terrible things to a student? Emma had done nothing to deserve this treatment. She was not lazy or ungrateful or attention-seeking. She was just a girl trying to survive in a world that had taken everything from her. She cried until she had no tears left, until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen. Then she sat on the bench, exhausted and empty, watching the leaves fall from the trees and drift across the grass. A voice broke through her thoughts. "Hey, are you okay?" Emma looked up to see a boy about her age standing a few feet away. He had dark hair and a concerned expression, and he was holding a soccer ball under one arm. "I'm fine," Emma said automatically, wiping her face with her sleeve. The boy did not look convinced. "You don't look fine. You look like someone was really mean to you." Emma almost laughed at the understatement. "Something like that," she admitted. The boy sat down on the other end of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Marcus," he said. "I go to Jefferson Elementary, 4th grade." Emma nodded. "I'm Emma, 5th grade." Marcus studied her for a moment. "I've seen you around school," he said. "You're the girl who always walks alone." Emma shrugged, not sure how to respond to that observation. "I don't mind being alone either," Marcus continued. "Most of the other kids think I'm weird because I'd rather read than play video games." He paused. "But sometimes it's nice to have someone to talk to." Despite everything, Emma felt a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "What do you like to read?" "Everything," Marcus said enthusiastically. "Fantasy, science fiction, mysteries. Right now I'm reading a book about a kid who discovers he's actually a wizard. It's really good." Emma thought about the book she had loved before the accident, the stories that had transported her to other worlds and other lives. She had not read for pleasure in a long time, too consumed by the demands of survival to indulge in such luxuries. "That sounds nice," she said softly. Marcus glanced at his watch and jumped up. "I have to go. My mom will be wondering where I am, but maybe I'll see you around." He hesitated. "And for what it's worth, whoever made you cry, they're wrong. I can tell you're a good person." He ran off before Emma could respond, leaving her alone with his words echoing in her mind. It was such a small thing, a kind word from a stranger, but it felt like a tiny light in the darkness that had surrounded her for so long. Emma walked back to the group home slowly, her mind churning with thoughts and emotions. She could not keep letting Mrs. Hendricks treat her this way. Something had to change. The next morning, Emma made a decision. She would go to the principal's office and report Mrs. Hendricks' behavior. It was a risk, she knew. The teacher might retaliate, might make her life even more difficult than it already was. But Emma could not continue to suffer in silence. She owed it to herself and to her parents' memory to stand up for what was right. She arrived at school early and made her way to the administrative office, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation. The secretary looked up as she entered, her expression friendly but distracted. "Can I help you, sweetheart?" "I need to speak with Principal Donovan," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's important." The secretary glanced at her schedule. "He has a few minutes before his first meeting. Let me see if he's available." She picked up the phone and spoke quietly for a moment, then hung up and nodded toward the principal's door. "Go on in, honey." Emma took a deep breath and walked into the office. Principal Donovan was a heavy-set man in his 50s with a kind face and a receding hairline. He looked up from his desk and smiled. "Good morning," he said. "Emma Carter, right, please. Have a seat. What can I do for you?" Emma sat in the chair across from his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I want to report a problem with one of my teachers," she said. Principal Donovan's smile faded, replaced by an expression of concern. "Go on," he encouraged. Emma told him everything. She told him about the creative writing assignment and how Mrs. Hendricks had crumpled her story in front of the class. She told him about being forced to wait until other students finished their work before turning in her own. She told him about the group project and the humiliating comments about her poster. And she told him about the conversation after school, about the teacher's suggestion that Emma's parents had died because she was not good enough. When she finished, Principal Donovan sat back in his chair, his face troubled. "These are serious allegations," he said slowly. "Mrs. Hendricks has been teaching here for over 20 years. She's well respected in the community." "I know," Emma said, her voice small but determined. "But everything I told you is true. I wouldn't lie about something like this." Principal Donovan studied her for a long moment. "I believe you're telling me what you experienced," he said carefully. "But there may be other perspectives on these events. I'll need to investigate further before taking any action." Emma's heart sank. "What does that mean?" "It means I'll speak with Mrs. Hendricks and some of the other students," Principal Donovan explained. "I'll try to get a complete picture of what's been happening. In the meantime, I want you to know that my door is always open if you have any other concerns." Emma nodded, feeling deflated. She had hoped for more, for some immediate acknowledgement that she had been wronged. But at least she had done something. At least she had spoken up. "Thank you for listening," she said, standing to leave. Principal Donovan stood as well. "Emma," he said gently, "I know things have been difficult for you since your parents passed. If you ever need someone to talk to, we have counselors available." Emma managed a weak smile. "Thank you," she said again, and left the office. The day passed slowly, each class feeling like an eternity. When it was time for Mrs. Hendricks's class, Emma took her seat with a sense of dread. She did not know if the principal had spoken to the teacher yet, did not know what kind of reception awaited her. Mrs. Hendricks swept into the classroom with her usual brisk efficiency, her face betraying nothing unusual. She began the lesson without preamble, discussing the assigned reading and calling on students to answer questions. Emma kept her head down, hoping to avoid notice. But near the end of class, something happened that would set the day's events into motion. Mrs. Hendricks had assigned a worksheet that the students were to complete individually. Emma finished hers quickly and sat quietly, following the teacher's earlier directive to wait until others were done. But when Mrs. Hendricks passed by her desk, she stopped and stared down at Emma with barely concealed hostility. "I see you've finished already," she said, her voice carrying across the silent classroom. "I suppose you think that makes you special." Emma shook her head quickly. "No, Mrs. Hendricks, I was just following the instructions." The teacher's eyes narrowed. "Don't talk back to me," she snapped. "You think I don't know what you did this morning?" Emma felt the blood drain from her face. She had not expected the principal to speak to Mrs. Hendricks so quickly, had not anticipated this confrontation in front of the entire class. "Running to the principal with your lies," Mrs. Hendricks continued, her voice rising, "trying to get me in trouble because you can't handle a little constructive criticism." "I wasn't lying," Emma said, her voice trembling. "Everything I said was true." Mrs. Hendricks' face contorted with anger. She reached down and grabbed Emma's ponytail, yanking her head back sharply. The pain was immediate and shocking, a bolt of fire shooting across Emma's scalp. "You listen to me," the teacher hissed, her face inches from Emma's. "I have worked at this school for 23 years. I am respected and admired, and I will not let some pathetic little orphan ruin my reputation with her fabricated sob stories." Emma cried out in pain, tears springing to her eyes. The other students sat frozen in their seats, watching in horrified disbelief as the scene unfolded before them. Mrs. Hendricks released Emma's hair with a final shake and stepped back, smoothing her dress as if nothing had happened. "Now," she said, her voice suddenly calm, "everyone pass your worksheets forward. Class is dismissed." The students shuffled out in stunned silence, casting frightened glances at Emma as they passed. Emma sat motionless at her desk, her scalp throbbing and her heart racing. She could not believe what had just happened. A teacher had physically assaulted her in front of the entire class. Madison Thompson lingered by the door, her face pale. She met Emma's eyes for a moment, something unreadable in her expression, before hurrying away. Emma did not go to her next class. Instead, she went straight to the principal's office and told the secretary what had happened. The woman's eyes widened with shock, and she immediately ushered Emma into Principal Donovan's office. When Emma finished recounting the incident, her words tumbling out in a rush of fear and disbelief, Principal Donovan's face had turned ashen. "She grabbed your hair," he repeated, "in front of the entire class?" Emma nodded, her hand unconsciously reaching up to touch her still tender scalp, "and she called me a pathetic little orphan." Principal Donovan stood abruptly and began pacing behind his desk. "This is serious," he muttered, more to himself than to Emma. "This is very serious." He stopped and looked at her with an expression of genuine concern. "Emma, I want you to stay here while I deal with this. I'm going to have the nurse check you out, and then we'll need to make some phone calls." The next few hours were a blur of activity. The school nurse examined Emma and documented the redness on her scalp where Mrs. Hendricks had grabbed her hair. Principal Donovan interviewed several students who had witnessed the incident, all of whom confirmed Emma's account. Mrs. Hendricks was summoned to the office and, faced with overwhelming evidence, was escorted from the building by security. By the time the final bell rang, the news had spread throughout the school. Mrs. Hendricks, the stern teacher who had terrified students for over 2 decades, had been suspended pending investigation. And it was all because of Emma Carter, the quiet orphan girl who sat in the back of the class. But for Emma, the day was far from over. As she was preparing to leave the principal's office, the secretary entered with a strange expression on her face. "There's someone here to see you," she told Emma. "He says he's your uncle." Emma's heart stopped. Her uncle, Michael Carter, was here? She followed the secretary to the front office and stopped short when she saw the man standing there. He was tall, just as she remembered, with the same dark hair and kind eyes as her father. But there was something different about him now, an air of authority and confidence that she did not recall from the funeral. "Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into a tight embrace. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner." Emma stood stiffly in his arms, too shocked to respond. After a moment she pulled back and looked up at him. "Uncle Michael, what are you doing here?" Michael Carter's face was a mixture of relief and guilt. "I got a call from the school," he explained, "about what happened today with your teacher." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I came as soon as I could." "But how did they know to call you?" Emma asked. "I thought you couldn't take care of me." Michael closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. "That's a long story," he said, "and I owe you an explanation. But first, let's get you out of here and somewhere safe. We can talk on the way." Emma looked at Principal Donovan, who nodded reassuringly. "Mr. Carter has provided documentation proving his relationship to you," he said, "and he's been in contact with your social worker. Everything is in order." Confused but hopeful, Emma followed her uncle out of the school and into the parking lot. A sleek black car was waiting at the curb, and a driver in a dark suit stood beside it, holding the rear door open. Emma stopped short. "Uncle Michael," she said slowly, "what's going on? What kind of job do you have?" Michael smiled sadly. "That's part of what I need to explain," he said. "Please get in the car. I promise I'll tell you everything." They drove through the city streets, leaving the familiar neighborhoods behind and heading toward the downtown area where the buildings grew taller and the traffic grew denser. Emma watched through the window, her mind racing with questions. "I'm a lawyer," Michael began, breaking the silence. "I specialize in civil rights cases, fighting for people who have been wronged by institutions, corporations, or individuals who abuse their power." Emma turned to look at him. "Like Mrs. Hendricks?" Michael nodded. "Like Mrs. Hendricks, but also much bigger cases." He paused. "Over the past few years, my firm has grown significantly. We've won some high-profile cases that have made us, well, not exactly popular with certain powerful people." "I don't understand," Emma said. "What does that have to do with why you couldn't take care of me?" Michael's expression grew heavy. "When your parents died, I was in the middle of a case against a large pharmaceutical company. They had covered up evidence that one of their drugs was causing serious side effects, and I was representing the families who had been harmed." He paused. "The company didn't appreciate my involvement. They started making threats, sending people to follow me, trying to intimidate me into dropping the case." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "That sounds scary." "It was," Michael admitted, "and when you needed a home, I was terrified that bringing you into my life would put you in danger. I thought you would be safer in foster care, at least until the case was resolved and the threat stopped." Emma absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the abandonment she had felt over the past 18 months. "So what changed? Why are you here now?" Michael reached over and took her hand. "The case ended 6 months ago," he said. "We won, and the people who were threatening me, they're no longer a concern. As soon as it was safe, I started the process to become your legal guardian. But these things take time, and I was told you were in a good placement." He shook his head. "I had no idea what was really happening to you. If I had known about that teacher, about how you were being treated." His voice trailed off, and Emma saw moisture glistening in his eyes. She squeezed his hand, surprised to find that her anger had faded, replaced by something closer to understanding. "I thought you didn't want me," she said quietly. "I thought you blamed me somehow for what happened to my parents." Michael's face crumpled. "Oh, Emma, no, never. I loved your father more than anyone in the world, and you are all I have left of him. Leaving you in that group home was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I thought I was protecting you." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 18 months of separation hanging between them. Then Emma spoke again. "So what happens now?" Michael straightened, a determined look crossing his face. "Now I take you home with me. Your room is already set up, your social worker has approved the transfer, and as of this afternoon, I am officially your guardian." He paused. "And as for Mrs. Hendricks, well, let's just say I have some experience dealing with people who abuse their authority." The car pulled up in front of a beautiful brownstone building in one of the nicest neighborhoods Emma had ever seen. She climbed out and stared up at the elegant facade, hardly daring to believe this was real. "Welcome home, Emma," Michael said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. Emma moved into Michael's brownstone, which had more rooms than she knew what to do with, and a small backyard garden that reminded her of her mother's flowers. She had her own bedroom, decorated in soft blues and greens, with a bookshelf already stocked with books she might enjoy, and a desk where she could do her homework. Michael was kind and attentive, making up for lost time with endless conversations over dinner and weekend outings to museums and parks. He enrolled her in a new school, a progressive academy with small class sizes and teachers who actually seemed to care about their students. For the first time in 18 months, Emma began to feel like she might actually be okay. But the matter of Mrs. Hendricks was far from settled. True to his word, Michael had begun gathering information about the teacher's behavior. What he discovered was shocking in its scope. Mrs. Hendricks had been terrorizing students for years, decades even, targeting those she perceived as weak or vulnerable. Orphans, children from low-income families, kids with learning differences, all had been subjected to her cruel treatment. But because she was careful to target those without powerful advocates, and because she was skilled at presenting a professional face to administrators and parents, she had never faced serious consequences. Until now. Michael contacted several of Mrs. Hendricks' former students, now adults, who were willing to share their stories. He gathered documentation of complaints that had been filed and ignored over the years. He built a case not just against the teacher, but against a system that had allowed her abuse to continue unchecked. 3 months after Emma's rescue, a civil lawsuit was filed against Mrs. Patricia Hendricks and the Chicago Board of Education. The case alleged years of emotional abuse and, in Emma's case, physical assault. It demanded accountability, damages, and systemic changes to protect students in the future. The lawsuit made national news. Former students came forward in droves, sharing stories of humiliation and trauma they had suffered at Mrs. Hendricks' hands. Parents expressed outrage that their children's complaints had been dismissed. Education advocates called for reforms to how schools handle teacher misconduct. Emma watched it all unfold with a mixture of vindication and unease. She had not asked for any of this, had not wanted to become the face of a crusade. All she had wanted was for someone to believe her, for someone to say that what was happening to her was wrong. One evening, as Emma sat doing her homework in the study, Michael came in and sat down across from her. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. Emma shrugged. "It's a lot," she admitted. "Everyone at my new school knows who I am now. They've seen me on the news." "Is that hard?" "Sometimes." Emma paused, searching for the right words. "But mostly I'm just glad it's over, and I'm glad that other kids won't have to go through what I went through." Michael nodded. "That's a very mature perspective," he said. "Your parents would be proud of you." At the mention of her parents, Emma felt the familiar ache in her chest. But for the first time in a long while, it was accompanied by something warmer, a sense of connection rather than loss. "Uncle Michael," she said slowly, "thank you for coming back, for believing me, for everything." Michael reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you," he replied, "for being brave enough to speak up, for not letting her break you." He smiled. "You're a remarkable young woman, Emma Carter, and I'm honored to be your family." The lawsuit proceeded through the legal system over the following year. Mrs. Hendricks, stripped of her teaching license and facing mounting evidence of her misconduct, eventually agreed to a settlement that included a substantial payment to her victims and a commitment to fund anti-bullying programs in schools throughout the district. But for Emma, the most important outcome was not the settlement or the reforms. It was the knowledge that her voice had mattered, that her suffering had not been in vain. By speaking up, she had not only freed herself from an abusive situation, but had also helped countless other children who had suffered in silence. On the 1-year anniversary of her arrival at Michael's home, Emma stood at the window of her bedroom, looking out at the garden below. Spring had arrived, and the flowers were beginning to bloom, splashes of color emerging from the dark soil. She thought about everything that had happened, the grief and the loneliness, the cruelty and the kindness. She thought about her parents, whose love had given her the strength to endure. She thought about Mrs. Hendricks, who had tried to convince her that she was worthless, and she thought about her uncle, who had swooped in at her darkest moment and reminded her that she was not alone. Emma smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She was going to be okay, more than okay. She was going to thrive. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Michael poked his head in, grinning. "Ready for breakfast? I made pancakes." Emma laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that she had almost forgotten she was capable of making. "Be right down," she said. She took one last look at the garden, at the new life pushing up through the earth, and headed downstairs to join her family. The following months brought continued healing and growth for Emma. She excelled at her new school, where her intelligence and curiosity were nurtured rather than punished. She made friends, real friends who liked her for who she was, rather than pitying her for what she had lost. She joined the school's debate team, discovering a talent for public speaking that would have surprised her younger self. Michael proved to be a devoted guardian, attending every school event and parent-teacher conference. He helped her with her homework when she struggled and celebrated her successes with genuine pride. Slowly, the distance between them closed, and what had begun as an awkward reunion became a true familial bond. But life, Emma was learning, rarely moved in straight lines. One autumn afternoon, about 18 months after Emma had come to live with Michael, she arrived home from school to find her uncle sitting in the living room with a serious expression on his face. "Emma," he said as she set down her backpack, "we need to talk." Her heart immediately began to race. In her experience, those words rarely preceded good news. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting down across from him. Michael hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I received a call today," he began, "from a law firm in Boston. They represent a woman named Sarah Mitchell." Emma frowned, the name unfamiliar. "Who is that?" Michael took a deep breath. "According to what they've told me, Sarah Mitchell is your mother's sister, your aunt." Emma felt the room tilt slightly. Her mother had never mentioned having a sister. "Are you sure?" she asked. "My mom never talked about any family." "I know," Michael said. "I looked into it. Apparently your mother and Sarah had a falling out years ago, before you were born. They haven't spoken since." He paused. "But Sarah saw the news coverage of the lawsuit. She recognized your mother's name and did some research. She's been trying to track you down ever since." Emma struggled to process this information. "So I have an aunt, someone from my mom's side of the family?" "It appears so," Michael confirmed, "and she wants to meet you." The revelation opened up a complicated mix of emotions. On one hand, Emma was curious about this unknown relative, this connection to her mother's past. On the other hand, she was afraid. She had finally found stability and happiness with Michael. What if this aunt wanted to disrupt that? As if reading her thoughts, Michael reached over and took her hand. "Nothing has to change," he assured her. "You're my daughter now, legally and in every way that matters. But I thought you should know about Sarah, and I think it's your decision whether or not to meet her." Emma considered this for several days. She asked Michael to share everything he had learned about Sarah Mitchell, a college professor in Boston who taught literature at a small liberal arts school. Unmarried, no children, living alone in a quiet suburb. The sister who had been erased from Emma's mother's life for reasons unknown. Finally, Emma made her decision. "I want to meet her," she told Michael. "I want to know why she and my mom stopped talking, and I want to know if she's someone I can have in my life." Michael nodded, a mixture of pride and apprehension in his eyes. "Then we'll arrange it," he said. The meeting took place on a Saturday afternoon at a quiet coffee shop midway between Chicago and Boston. Emma sat at a table near the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate, watching the door with nervous anticipation. When Sarah Mitchell walked in, Emma knew immediately that this was her aunt. The resemblance to her mother was striking, the same auburn hair, the same delicate features, the same way of holding herself as if bracing against an invisible wind. Sarah approached the table slowly, her eyes fixed on Emma's face. She looked like she might cry. "You look just like her," she said softly, "just like Caroline." Emma stood, not sure whether to shake hands or hug or do something else entirely. "I'm Emma," she said unnecessarily. "I know," Sarah's voice cracked. "I know who you are, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm so sorry for everything." They sat down together, and over the next 3 hours, Emma learned the story of her mother's secret past. Caroline and Sarah had grown up in a difficult household. Their father was a strict, controlling man who expected perfection from his daughters and punished any deviation harshly. Caroline had escaped at 18, earning a scholarship to a college far from home and never looking back. But Sarah had stayed, trapped by a combination of fear and misplaced loyalty. The rift between the sisters came when Sarah finally confronted their father about his treatment of them. Caroline, who had spent years trying to forget her childhood, was furious that Sarah had reopened old wounds. Words were exchanged, accusations made, and the two sisters had parted ways in anger. "I always meant to reach out," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I always thought there would be time to make things right. And then I heard about the accident, and it was too late. She was gone, and I never got to tell her how sorry I was." Emma listened, her heart aching for both her mother and the aunt she was only now meeting. "My mom never talked about her childhood," she said. "I had no idea any of this happened." Sarah nodded. "Caroline was very good at compartmentalizing. She wanted to give you a happy life, free from the shadows of her past." She wiped her eyes. "But I'm here now, and if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your life. Not to replace anyone," she added quickly, "just to be there for you, like I should have been all along." Emma looked at this woman, this stranger who carried her mother's face and her mother's pain. She thought about the family she had lost and the family she had found, and she realized that love, true love, was not diminished by being shared. It only grew. "I'd like that," Emma said. "I'd like to get to know you." Sarah's face broke into a tremulous smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." In the years that followed, Emma's family expanded in ways she could never have imagined. Michael remained her primary guardian and her rock, the steady presence she could always rely on. Sarah became a regular part of her life, visiting for holidays and calling every Sunday to catch up on Emma's week. The two women, aunt and niece, slowly built a relationship based on shared grief and mutual hope. Emma graduated from high school at the top of her class and was accepted to a prestigious university on a full scholarship. She chose to study law, inspired by her uncle's work and her own experience standing up against injustice. She was determined to spend her life helping others find their voices, just as she had found hers. On the night before she left for college, Emma stood once again at the window of her bedroom, looking out at the garden that had become her sanctuary. So much had changed since that frightened 10-year-old had walked through the doors of Jefferson Elementary School. So much had been lost, but so much had also been gained. Michael came to stand beside her, his presence warm and reassuring. "Are you ready?" he asked. Emma smiled, feeling the full weight of the question. She was leaving behind the only true home she had known since her parents' death. She was stepping into an uncertain future, full of challenges and opportunities she could not yet imagine. But she was not afraid. "I'm ready," she said, and then, after a moment, "Thank you, Uncle Michael, for everything." Michael put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "Your father would be so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. They both would be. Emma leaned into him, feeling the love that surrounded her like a warm embrace. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and the triumph, the despair and the hope. She thought about Mrs. Hendricks, whose cruelty had been the catalyst for so much change. And she thought about the little girl she had been, the one who had sat alone on a park bench and wondered if anyone would ever care. That little girl had found her answer. The next morning, Emma loaded her suitcases into Michael's car and took one last look at the brownstone that had become her home. Sarah was there to see her off, having driven through the night to be present for this milestone. The two of them stood on the sidewalk, wrapped in each other's arms. "Call me when you get there," Sarah said, her voice muffled against Emma's shoulder. "And remember, you are never alone. No matter what happens, you have people who love you." "I know," Emma replied. "I finally know." The drive to the university took several hours, but Emma barely noticed the time passing. She was lost in thought, reflecting on the past and dreaming of the future. When they finally arrived at the campus, she felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. Michael helped her carry her bags to her dormitory room, where her new roommate, a cheerful girl named Jessica, was already unpacking. The two of them hit it off immediately, and by the time Michael was ready to leave, Emma was laughing at one of Jessica's stories, as if they had known each other for years. She walked Michael back to his car, the late summer sun warm on her face. "This is it," Michael said, his eyes glistening, "the beginning of the rest of your life." Emma hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she said again, "for believing in me, for never giving up." Michael kissed the top of her head. "You made it easy," he said. "You're the bravest person I know." He got in the car and drove away, and Emma watched until the vehicle disappeared around a corner. Then she turned and walked back toward her dormitory, toward her new life, toward everything that awaited her. Years later, Emma would look back on this moment as a turning point, the instant when she truly became the person she was meant to be. Not because of the university or the education she would receive there, though those things were important, but because it was the moment when she finally let go of the past and embraced the future, when she stopped defining herself by her losses and started defining herself by her choices. She became a civil rights attorney, just as she had planned. She married a kind man who made her laugh and gave her 2 beautiful children. She stayed close to Michael and Sarah, gathering her small family around her for every holiday and milestone. And she never forgot the lessons she had learned during those difficult years, lessons about resilience and courage and the transformative power of love. Sometimes, late at night, she would think about Mrs. Hendricks. The teacher had died several years after the lawsuit. Bitter and alone, her reputation destroyed. Emma did not feel satisfaction at this outcome, only a distant sadness for a life spent spreading pain instead of light. But mostly, Emma thought about her parents, about her father's hands guiding her bicycle, his voice telling her to get back up and try again, about her mother's smile, the way she would sing while she gardened, the love that had filled their small house with warmth. They had given her everything, and though they were gone, their legacy lived on in the woman she had become. On her 40th birthday, Emma stood in her own garden, surrounded by her family. Michael, now in his 70s but still sharp and energetic, was playing with her children. Sarah sat in a lawn chair, a book in her lap, looking peaceful and content. Emma's husband was at the grill, flipping burgers and laughing at something one of the kids had said. Emma watched them all, her heart full to bursting. This was what her parents had wanted for her. This was the happy life they had sacrificed so much to give her. She closed her eyes and felt the sun on her face, the breeze in her hair, and in that moment she could almost hear her father's voice carried on the wind. "I knew you could do it, sweetheart. I always knew." Emma smiled, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered. "Thank you for teaching me to be brave." The party continued around her, laughter and love filling the air. And Emma Carter, the orphan girl who had once been told she was worthless, knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home. The next chapter of Emma's life brought new challenges and new triumphs. Her career as a civil rights attorney flourished as she took on cases that reminded her of her own childhood struggles. She represented children who had been failed by the system, fighting to ensure that their voices were heard and their rights protected. One case in particular stood out. A young boy named Daniel, only 8 years old, had been repeatedly bullied by his teacher in a way that eerily echoed Emma's own experience. The school had dismissed the parents' complaints, and the boy had withdrawn into himself, refusing to speak to anyone. Emma took the case pro bono, throwing herself into the fight with a passion that surprised even herself. She spent hours with Daniel, slowly earning his trust until he finally opened up about what had been happening to him. "She says I'm stupid," Daniel whispered, his small hands clenched in his lap. "She says I'll never amount to anything." Emma knelt down so she was at his eye level. "Can I tell you a secret?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded. "When I was about your age, a teacher said those same things to me. She made me feel like I was worthless, like I didn't deserve to be happy." Daniel's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," Emma confirmed. "But you know what? She was wrong, and the teacher who is saying those things to you, she's wrong too. You are smart and brave, and you deserve to be treated with kindness." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "What happened to your teacher?" he asked. Emma smiled. "I told people what she was doing. It was scary, but I didn't give up, and eventually she couldn't hurt anyone anymore." "Can you help me?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can you make her stop?" Emma felt her heart crack open. "That's exactly what I'm going to do," she promised. "I'm going to fight for you, and I'm not going to stop until you're safe." The case was long and difficult. The school district fought back, trying to protect the teacher and minimize the extent of the abuse. But Emma was relentless, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and building an airtight case that left the school with no choice but to act. In the end, the teacher was fired, the school district implemented new policies for handling complaints, and Daniel was transferred to a new school where he could start fresh. His parents tearfully thanked Emma for giving their son back to them. "You didn't just help Daniel," his mother said. "You saved his life." Emma hugged her, remembering her own journey. "I know what it's like," she said simply. "I know how important it is to have someone believe you." That case brought Emma national attention, and soon she was receiving calls from families all over the country, all seeking help for their children. She couldn't take every case, but she did what she could, building a team of attorneys who shared her passion and commitment. But even as her professional life soared, Emma never lost sight of what truly mattered. Her family remained her anchor, the foundation on which everything else was built. Her children, a daughter named Caroline after her mother and a son named David after her father, grew up surrounded by love. Emma told them stories about the grandparents they had never met, making sure that Caroline and David's memory lived on in the next generation. She also told them about the hard times, about the group home and Mrs. Hendricks, and the fear and loneliness she had felt. She wanted her children to understand that life could be difficult, but that difficulty could be overcome with courage and persistence. "What did you learn from all of that?" her daughter asked one evening, as Emma was tucking her into bed. Emma thought about the question for a long moment. "I learned that the people who try to make you feel small are usually the ones who feel small themselves," she said. "And I learned that the best way to fight cruelty is with kindness, with strength, and with the determination to never let anyone dim your light." Her daughter nodded solemnly. "I'm going to remember that, Mommy." Emma kissed her forehead. "I know you will, sweetheart." As the years passed, Emma became a well-known advocate for children's rights. She gave speeches, wrote articles, and worked with lawmakers to strengthen protections for vulnerable young people. Her name became synonymous with the fight against bullying and abuse in schools. But perhaps her greatest impact came through the foundation she established in her parents' names. The Caroline and David Carter Foundation provided scholarships to orphaned children, funded counseling services for abuse survivors, and trained teachers in recognizing and responding to bullying. Michael, now retired from his own legal practice, served on the foundation's board. Sarah contributed her expertise in literature, developing a program that used storytelling to help traumatized children process their experiences. Together, they built something that touched thousands of lives. "We're making a difference," Michael said at one of the foundation's annual galas, raising his glass in a toast, "because of one brave little girl who refused to stay silent." Emma smiled, feeling the truth of his words. She had come so far from that frightened child who had walked into the principal's office with her heart pounding in her chest. But in some ways, she was still the same person, still fighting for what was right, still refusing to let cruelty go unanswered. After the gala, Emma sat alone in her office, looking at a photograph on her desk. It showed her parents on their wedding day, young and happy and full of hope. Next to it was a more recent photo, showing Emma with her own family, Michael, Sarah, her husband and her children, all gathered together, all smiling. Two families, separated by time and tragedy, but connected by an unbroken thread of love. "I did it, Mom and Dad," Emma whispered to the empty room. "I made it through, and I'm going to keep fighting for as long as it takes, for as long as there are children who need someone in their corner." She touched the photograph gently, feeling the connection to her past and her future. "Thank you for teaching me to be brave." The next morning, Emma woke early and went for a walk in the park near her house. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Birds were beginning to sing, and the world felt fresh and full of possibility. She thought about all the children she had helped over the years, all the lives that had been changed because someone had listened, someone had cared. She thought about the ones she had not been able to help, the ones who had fallen through the cracks despite her best efforts. And she thought about the future, about the work that still needed to be done. There would always be Mrs. Hendricks in the world, people who used their power to hurt the vulnerable. There would always be children like Daniel, like the young Emma, who needed someone to stand up for them. But there would also always be people willing to fight back. People like Michael, who had swooped in when Emma needed him most. People like Sarah, who had reached out across years of silence to offer love and connection. People like Emma herself, who had taken her pain and transformed it into purpose. That was the lesson, Emma realized. That was what her journey had taught her. You cannot control what happens to you. You cannot prevent every injustice or stop every cruel word, but you can control how you respond. You can choose to let your experiences break you, or you can choose to let them make you stronger. Emma had made her choice a long time ago, in a park much like this one, when a kind boy named Marcus had reminded her that she was a good person. She had made her choice again in the principal's office, when she had found the courage to speak up. And she had made her choice every day since, in 1,000 small ways that added up to a life of meaning and impact. She walked home as the sun continued to rise, feeling the warmth on her face and the peace in her heart. Her children would be waking up soon, and her husband would be making coffee, and the day would begin with all its ordinary miracles. Emma smiled, grateful beyond words for everything she had and everything she had overcome to get here. The story of the orphan girl and the cruel teacher had become the story of a woman who had refused to be defined by her circumstances, a woman who had turned tragedy into triumph, pain into purpose, and loss into love. And that, Emma knew, was the greatest victory of all. In the final years of her career, Emma took on one last case, one that would cement her legacy and bring her journey full circle. A class action lawsuit against a major school district representing over 200 children who had suffered abuse and neglect at the hands of teachers and administrators. It was the largest case of its kind in history, and it required every ounce of Emma's skill and determination. The trial lasted 6 months. Emma presented testimony from child after child, each one sharing their story of mistreatment and betrayal. She fought through legal maneuvers and procedural challenges, never losing sight of the vulnerable young people she was fighting for. In the end, the jury found in favor of the plaintiffs, awarding the largest damages in any education-related case in American history. More importantly, the verdict led to sweeping reforms in how schools handled allegations of abuse, ensuring that no child would be ignored or dismissed as Emma had once been. On the day the verdict was announced, Emma stood on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by the families she had represented. Camera flashes illuminated the evening air as reporters shouted questions, but Emma's attention was focused on the children, some now teenagers and young adults, who had trusted her with their stories. "This verdict is not just about money," Emma said into the microphones. "It's about recognition. It's about saying to every child who has ever been hurt by someone in a position of authority that they matter, their pain matters, their voices matter." She paused, thinking of her own journey. "It took me a long time to learn that lesson," she continued. "I was a child who thought she was alone, who thought no one would believe her. But I was wrong. And I want every child watching this to know that they are not alone either. There are people who will fight for them. There are people who will believe them." The crowd erupted in applause, but Emma barely heard it. She was looking at a young girl in the front row, no more than 10 years old, who was watching her with wide, hopeful eyes. Emma smiled at her, remembering. That girl could have been her all those years ago, lost and afraid, but not yet broken, waiting for someone to tell her that she mattered. "You matter," Emma mouthed silently. "You are brave." The girl smiled back, and in that moment Emma knew that everything she had been through, every tear and every struggle, had been worth it. She had broken the cycle, and now she had helped others break it too. 1 year later, Emma retired from active legal practice, handing over her firm to the young attorneys she had mentored. She was 62 years old, and though she could have continued working for many more years, she wanted to spend her remaining time with her family. Her children had grown into remarkable adults. Caroline was a teacher, inspired by her mother's stories to pursue a career where she could make a difference in young lives. David had become a social worker, helping children in foster care navigate the system that had once failed his mother. Michael, now in his 80s, had slowed down considerably, but remained sharp and engaged. He and Emma still talked every Sunday, long conversations about everything and nothing, the kind of easy communion that came from decades of shared history. Sarah had passed away 5 years earlier, peacefully in her sleep. Emma had been by her side at the end, holding her hand and telling her how much she had meant to her. The reconciliation between the sisters had never been completed, but Emma had made her peace with that. She knew that her mother would have been glad that Sarah had found happiness in her final years. On the first anniversary of her retirement, Emma gathered her family at the brownstone, the same house where Michael had first brought her all those years ago. They filled the rooms with laughter and noise, 3 generations celebrating together. After dinner, Emma slipped away to the garden, where the roses were in full bloom. She sat on a bench and closed her eyes, breathing in the sweet fragrance. Footsteps approached, and she opened her eyes to see her granddaughter, a precocious 5-year-old named Lily, standing before her. "What are you doing, Grandma?" Lily asked. Emma smiled and patted the bench beside her. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," she said. Lily climbed up and snuggled against her grandmother's side. "Tell me a story," she demanded. Emma laughed. "What kind of story?" "A story about you," Lily said, "about when you were little like me." Emma thought for a moment, then began to speak. "Once upon a time there was a little girl who lost her mom and dad. She was very sad and very scared, and she didn't know if anyone would ever love her again." Lily's eyes widened. "What happened to her?" "Well, some people were mean to her," Emma continued. "They said hurtful things and made her feel small. But she didn't give up. She kept trying, kept believing that things would get better." "Did they?" Lily asked, her voice hushed. Emma hugged her granddaughter closer. "They did," she confirmed, "because there were also kind people in the world, people who saw how special she was, who helped her when she needed it most. And eventually, she found her way to a place where she was loved and happy." Lily smiled. "That's a good story," she declared. Emma kissed the top of her head. "It is," she agreed. "And do you know what the little girl learned?" "What?" "That no matter how dark things seem, there's always hope. That kindness is stronger than cruelty, and that love, real love, never dies. It just changes form." Lily nodded solemnly, as if she understood the weight of these words. Then she brightened. "Can I have some more cake?" Emma laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Of course you can, sweetheart. Let's go get some together." They walked hand in hand back to the house, where the lights glowed warm and welcoming against the evening sky. Inside, Emma's family was waiting, full of love and laughter and all the messy, beautiful chaos of life. She had started with nothing. Now she had everything. And that, Emma thought, was the real story. Not the tragedy that had begun her journey, but the triumph that had completed it. Not the cruelty she had endured, but the love she had found. Not the teacher who had tried to break her, but the woman she had become. A woman who had turned her pain into purpose, her fear into courage, and her loneliness into a love that would ripple through generations. A woman who had proven once and for all that no matter what life throws at you, you have the power to write your own ending. And Emma's ending, she decided, was exactly what she had always wanted. A life well lived, a family well loved, and a legacy that would outlast them all.